This case takes place in Glasgow, Scotland, during the month of April 2011. Lynda Spence was a 27-year-old woman who presented herself as a self-employed financial advisor. She ran a mortgage broking company and a property rental business in Glasgow. Despite these rather impressive and prestigious-sounding titles, she was in fact a fraud. She had been bankrupt, was in serious debt to some very unsavory individuals, and was frequently involved in fraudulent and criminal activity. The police were very well aware of Lynda. In 2011, they were investigating a number of fraud cases that were linked to her. She also reportedly was in a relationship with an Albanian criminal, a man who was involved in crimes such as human trafficking. Through these activities, Lynda became associated with two Scottish criminal males, Philip Wade and Colin Coats. These two men were in the business of dealing illegal substances. Colin Coats was an incredibly strange character. He was born on the 3rd of September 1970 and was brought up in Glasgow. At around 16, he pursued a career in computers and began working for the Civil Aviation Authority. Those who knew Colin saw him as somewhat of a computer geek. At some point, he decided that he wanted to try and make some serious cash, so he pursued a career in investment banking and worked for a number of companies as a systems administrator assisting traders on large projects. He became incredibly wealthy and was earning around £200,000 a year in the 90s. Colin met and married a woman named Angela, and the couple went on to have 3 children together. As cliché as it sounds, Colin had what many would describe as a perfect life. However, the first signs of what Colin would become occurred in 1999, when he was arrested by police in London after attacking his wife. The couple lived in London for some time, but eventually decided to move back to Glasgow, where Colin began working as a property developer, and he did incredibly well in this too. He would often brag to his friends about his success, and would tell them that he never failed at anything. Although this arrogance would soon get the better of him. His life spiraled out of control with a descent into alcohol and illegal substances. With these addictions, he became increasingly more violent. He got into an argument with a man over football and ended up attacking him. His addictions caused great trouble in his family life, and in 2007, Colin and his wife Angela broke up. Not long after the breakup, he attacked Angela's sister in the street. As he was beating her up, an old man tried to stop him, but Colin turned around and attacked the old man too. He was also charged with ramming Angela's car, among other incidents of extreme road rage. But whenever the police were pursuing him, he would flee the country to his lavish villa in Costa Blanca. In 2010, Colin was arrested after attacking a passenger on a plane whilst shouting, "I'm Colin Coats, I'm a gangster." He then threatened to blow up the plane and throw acid in the faces of people's children. It was around this time that he became involved with organised crime and became friends with a known dealer named Philip Wade. These two men then became associated with Lynda Spence. Colin gave Lynda a number of short-term loans amounting to a few £1,000s. By 2010 or early 2011, he considered that she owed him around £80,000. Eventually, Lynda presented Colin with an investment project at Stansted Airport, an investment project that Colin became incredibly interested in. She promised him returns in the millions, but things that sound too good to be true often are, and this was no exception. Colin invested a large amount of money in Lynda's project. It soon became clear to Colin that this investment opportunity was an incredibly elaborate scam to keep Colin calm, as she was unable to repay his loans. By the end of March 2011, Colin knew for sure that Lynda had scammed him, and he was absolutely outraged. Colin was rather egotistical and believed himself to be incredibly smart, which he was to some degree. The thought of being scammed out of thousands of pounds was a huge blow to his ego and made him look like a fool to his criminal friends. Colin's friend Philip Wade had also been scammed by Lynda in the past. At some point, Philip had been arrested and was on remand. He had contacted Lynda and asked her if she could help him. She received £700 from Philip so she could buy presents for his children whilst he was locked up, but Lynda spent all of the money on herself. Colin decided to take action. He acquired the help of his friend Philip and planned to kidnap Lynda and force her to hand over the money. On the 14th of April 2011, they carried out their plan. They found Lynda, detained her against her will, and forced her into a car. They then took her to an attic of a flat and bound her to a chair with tape and put tape over her mouth to stop her from screaming and to restrict her breathing. They also covered her eyes so she couldn't see anything. It was in this building that Lynda was subjected to horrific torture for 14 days. Colin brought with him a bag filled with various tools and appliances that could be used to inflict unbearable pain. He essentially brought with him a torture kit. Colin began to viciously beat Lynda, punching her numerous times in the face and put out lit cigarettes on her skin, whilst demanding to know where the money was. The men stole her iPhone and SIM card and used these to message her family and friends so they would not arouse suspicion. During the 14 days that Lynda was held captive, both Colin and Philip needed to attend other matters, so they hired two small-time criminals named David Parker and Paul Smith to keep an eye on Lynda. Their job was to guard her between the lengthy torture sessions so she would have no chance of escape. It's unclear as to what Lynda told the men, however, the torture would soon ramp up. Over the days, Lynda was repeatedly struck with a golf club and was not allowed to leave the chair she was tied to. She was forced to sit in her own waste. It is believed that Colin was the main instigator in the torture of Lynda. Colin had brought with him a smoothing iron that is used on clothing. He used this device to burn various parts of Lynda's exposed skin. He would hold it down on her skin for prolonged periods of time. Later on, Colin grabbed a pair of shears out of his bag and cut off one of Lynda's fingers and her thumb. Colin then used blunt instruments to shatter her kneecaps, and with a pair of pliers, he crushed every single one of Lynda's toes. For days, Lynda endured such cruelty, being beaten with blunt instruments, being horrifically burned with a hot iron, having multiple cigarettes put out on her flesh, and being alone and terrified, unable to scream for help. All the while, her friends and family were receiving messages from her phone, so they were none the wiser as to what was really happening. On the 26th of April 2011, Colin met with an associate of Lynda's, a man named John Glenn. Lynda owed John around £180,000, but she was making efforts to pay him back. It is believed that around £50,000 was repaid. The two men met up and conversed. Colin told John that the money Lynda had repaid him was actually his money and he wanted it back. Colin then told John that he had something to show him. He proceeded to pull out a plastic bag from his pocket that was scrunched up and wrapped around something. He then opened the bag and showed John a severed human finger. The finger was of course Lynda's. Colin then pulled out an A4 size book of records from Lynda and said that he didn't believe John had only received around £50,000 from her. Colin then said, "I've gone over this twice and people are having their thumbs cut off. Don't tell lies. I want my money and I want it first, and if I don't get it from you, I'm going to kill you." 2 days after this meeting, Colin decided that it was time to end Lynda's life. Her body at this point would have been in a horrific state. As Lynda sat tied in the same chair she had been forced to sit in, Colin taped her mouth shut and held her nose until she stopped panicking and struggling. After this, Colin and Philip got to work disposing of her body. They cut her up into numerous pieces and removed her head. After this, they began to meticulously clean every part of the flat to ensure that absolutely no DNA evidence could be recovered. They then transported Lynda's body to an unknown location and disposed of her, likely burying her underground. Lynda's physical absence eventually made her family and friends incredibly concerned. Her worried parents, Patricia and Jim, reported her missing on the 13th of May, and appeals were made to the public for any information.
It's Father's Day this Sunday. Please let us know you're safe and well. If anyone has information that can help Lynda, please contact us.
Lynda's family made several appeals to the public, hoping for someone to come forward with the information that would lead to the safe return of their daughter. Due to Lynda's incredibly shady business deals, her theory was that she had fled the country for her own safety. It then came out that Lynda was actually a police informant and had been gathering intelligence on Albanian criminals for the police. As the police looked further into Lynda's disappearance, one name popped up a number of times: Colin Coats. The police suspected that he could have played a part in her disappearance. They suspected that she could be dead. Colin became a prime suspect in the investigation, and as a result of this, he was placed under surveillance. But when the detectives tried to dig deeper into the case, they found that witnesses were too fearful to speak out against him. A few months later, on the 16th of August, Colin met up again with John Glenn, the man I mentioned earlier, who was shown the severed finger of Lynda and was threatened by Colin. Well, Colin threatened him yet again to pay back the money, and John, fearing for his life, agreed to pay him back as to not anger him further. However, after this meeting, John Glenn went right to the police and told them everything he knew about the disappearance of Lynda and the severed finger. The police continued to gather more evidence, and on the 28th of October, 6 months after Lynda was murdered, officers smashed their way into the flat that she was killed in. The flat had almost been cleaned spotless, but a drop of Lynda's blood was found on the bathroom floor, and the chair that she had been tormented in was found in the garden burnt. David Parker and Paul Smith, the two small-time criminals that were hired to watch over Lynda, were arrested. The two agreed to spill everything they knew, and agreed to give evidence for the prosecution in return for lesser sentences. They told the police all about the torture and murder of Lynda. Philip and Colin were arrested and charged with murder. The two denied any involvement in the murder, but there was strong evidence against them. The police looked through mobile phone records of Colin and Philip, and were able to place them at the scene of the crime over the 14 days that Lynda would have been tortured. After the arrest of Colin, some rather strange footage of him was shared to the public.
Saying I'll do the wetsuit and the Sean Connery. I have the booster in my shirt. Much money back. Right? I went up to drop off some inspiration, right? And as I went to drop off the inspiration, she handed me something back. So I went and left for a few hours with my mate Mark, got absolutely tarted, turned up at the door later on. She who must not be named was there, right? That's when I turned up, and I turned up just in a pair of stockings. Young men for extortion, abduction, tying up, only during funerals, bar mitzvahs. Call 1-800-SUPER-PANY. See you, bye!
The police tried to search for Lynda's body, but neither Colin or Philip would tell them anything. The trial would soon begin, and it came out that Smith and Parker had both been paid £10,000 to babysit Lynda after her abduction. Paul Smith claimed that he had been hoodwinked into providing a safe house where Philip and Colin could keep her. He claimed Lynda was alive when he last saw her, but was too scared of Colin to let her go free. He went on to say, "I hope that Lynda's body is found for her family's sake." During the trial, Colin's past was brought up. The prosecutor said, "You were a wealthy man. What happened?" Colin replied by saying, "There was a breakdown in my marriage which had devastating effects. Access was stopped to my 3 kids, and I took that in a bad way." He told the jury that he drank heavily after the breakup and began taking illegal substances. He claimed that these things absolutely ruined him as a person. Through the trial, both Colin and Philip proclaimed their innocence, but the jury didn't believe them. Both men were found guilty of the murder of Lynda. Colin was sentenced to life with a minimum term of 33 years in prison, and Philip was sentenced to life with a minimum term of 31 years. The judge described Colin as a highly ruthless and dangerous man who had been the driving force behind Lynda's torture and murder. The judge said, "You are clearly a man of some intelligence who attained a measure of some success, but you are a manipulative, devious, and cruel person. You will not necessarily be released after 30 years, and may indeed never be released." It's reported that neither of the killers showed any emotion as they were handed down their life sentences. Both Parker and Smith admitted to holding Lynda hostage, and they were jailed for 11 years each. Following their sentences, Colin and Philip tried to appeal, but these appeals were rejected swiftly. Over the years, the police have searched for Lynda's body, but they have been unsuccessful. But 12 years later, in April of 2023, Colin admitted to killing Lynda. He wrote a letter for Lynda's mother, and in this letter he wrote, "I feel compelled to clarify some background for Patricia Spence with the plight of finding her daughter's remains. Lynda's mother's animus towards me is to be expected. I tortured and killed her daughter." He goes on to say that he will assist the police in finding Lynda's remains, and he gave them a location to search so her family can give her a proper burial and give them some closure. In this letter, Colin went on to say, "I hope that when the police examine this field, they are successful in returning Lynda's remains to her mother. I did not set out to do this, but I did, and I did it alone. I presented Philip Wade with a dead body. Recently, I have apologized to him, but he has not accepted, as I'm sure also any apology to Lynda's mum would be met with a similar response. At this present moment in time, Lynda's body has not yet been found."